Good afternoon, everybody. As always, my name is JC, and welcome to my channel, Every Man's Thoughts. As today is Saturday, it's time for another Warcraft video. Before we jump in, I do record Warcraft videos at least once a week. That number is likely to increase on the release of Shadowlands, so if this is something that interests you, please consider hitting the like button or subscribe, and let's get started. The dev team this week made two absolutely epic changes that I could not be happier about. In Shadowlands, when you create a legendary, you need a few things: a couple of trade skill items, an effect, and the time-gated item, which is Soul Ash, the currency from Torgash. Up until now, Blizz had a very simplistic progression system to upgrade your legendary. 100 Soul Ash for your first rank, 200 for the second, 300 for the third, and 400 for the fourth. If a player cleared all 8 levels of each of the 2 available wings of Torgash each week, you could earn a maximum of 100 Soul Ash. This meant that you could get a legendary week 1. The issue I had, and the reason why I'm glad they made the change, was the amount of grinding that would have been necessary for competitive gameplay in the very first week. Without a lot of luck, you can't just walk in and clear the 8th level of a Torgash wing. It's not trivial content. This would have put a lot of pressure on competitive players to grind levels and gear and eventually Torgash itself just to make sure they got their legendary as early as possible. With the new changes, the dev team has now made it impossible to achieve a legendary week 1 and increase the life cycle of the legendary upgrade process as a whole. The second and even more important change is the introduction of the Chronicles of Lost Memories. If you recall, I mentioned when crafting a legendary you need an effect. Effects are acquired by participating in different forms of content almost exactly the same way essences were acquired in Battle for Azeroth. Well, thank God Blizzard learned from their mistake. Using a Chronicle of Lost Memories will allow you to learn a random legendary effect that you don't already know. This is a huge quality of life upgrade and rectifies one of the worst mistakes from BFA. You can now learn all of the effects by participating in the content that you wanted to, then use the Chronicle to learn the effects and circumvent the content that you had no interest in. So, moving on. The main headline this week was, of course, the Blue Post announcing the long-awaited Blizzard policy change in regards to multi-boxing. To clarify what multi-boxing is, for some that may not understand, it is essentially a piece of software that takes individual user keystrokes and broadcasts them to multiple Warcraft clients all at the same time. It's not considered botting because a user is in control. However, it is problematic because that same user can control a virtually unlimited number of characters with a single keystroke. Multi-boxing carries a negative connotation as it allows a single player to control enough characters to deplete all of the resource nodes in a given zone, or worse, to utterly decimate the quest and farm NPCs to the exclusion of all other players. People have been asking for this change for a long time, so it does beg the question, why now? For me, there's one thing that jumps out that a lot of people aren't talking about as it relates to this story, and that's the leveling experience in Shadowlands. Unlike every expansion before it, Shadowlands is going to have a completely linear leveling experience, essentially everybody on the same track at the same time. Thus, in the first few weeks of the expansion, this is inevitably going to lead to bottlenecking issues. Now imagine one of those bottlenecks being completely dominated by one player controlling several characters who are in turn using instacast spells to immediately tag and claim all of the necessary quest NPCs. This is going to exacerbate the pre-existing problem. Obviously, Blizz has a lot of good reasons to finally outlaw broadcast software that facilitates multi-boxing, but I'd be very surprised if this wasn't high on the list. Speaking of Shadowlands leveling, there's been some changes there as well. A short time ago, the beta servers saw a significant increase in the XP requirement to cap, roughly 20%. Now, I want to give some background and context here. When Shadowlands beta servers first launched, you could just follow the main campaign storyline and, depending on a few variables, be very close to level cap. From Blizzard's point of view, this caused a few problems, not only the bottlenecks that we spoke about earlier, but it also devalued the ancillary content that they created outside the main campaign storyline. In response, Blizzard turned around and dramatically increased the amount of XP required to cap. This caused its own problem, simply put, because the expansion wasn't designed that way. Players would be prohibited from continuing the main campaign storyline and have no idea why. Once they figured out it's because they didn't meet the required level, they would now have to backtrack and look for experience opportunities in zones they may have left a long time ago. So, about 2 weeks ago, Blizzard reverted most of the changes, and you could come close to hitting level cap just by following the main campaign storyline, depending on war mode and a few other things. And that brings us to where we are now, with the addition of another 20% XP to cap. Hopefully this provides a good middle ground. Based on my limited access to Shadowlands leveling after these modifications, I would make the following suggestions. First, do all of the quests that are in the immediate vicinity of the main campaign storyline. You don't have to go exploring for new hubs, but you don't want to leave any crumbs on the table either. Also, if you have a good idea of what covenant you're going to choose, I'd recommend doing all of the quests in that zone. Many of those quests will be a prerequisite for that faction's weekly event, so better to get it out of the way while you're leveling instead of after you've already hit cap. And finally, dungeon XP globally, not just Shadowlands but for all content, has been considerably reduced. If you like dungeon crawls, that's awesome, but if you are looking for the most efficient path forward, they should not be part of your leveling plans at any level. Well guys, that's it. Please consider a like or a subscribe, and I will see you next Saturday.